All right, people, let's get started. Ooh, I'm super excited, which is so weird about this subject. All right. Hello, everyone. This is Jeff Harry with Rediscover Your Play. I help people tap back into their inner child because that is where I believe the answers lie. And I have two amazing people here with me today. We have Lauren Yee, and then we have Julia De Canava. How do I Caneva?
Caneva.
Yeah.
Caneva.
So can you both of you introduce yourselves?
Go for it, Julia.
Amazing. Well, Caneva. It's a doozy. I live in Los Angeles and I work as a life coach, and I specialize in intentional living. So really about slowing down and leaning into what you're naturally good at and trying to build your own path forward and ignore all the outsiders. And as you can see, I love deep breaths. So if they, when in doubt, take a deep breath. Amazing. I'm so glad to be here today.
I love that. And then Lauren?
Thanks for having me as well. I'm Lauren Yee, and I'm in California in the United States. And I am, I like to call myself a cultivator of curiosity, because I like to learn things and ask a lot of questions, and just there's not necessarily right or right answers a lot of times. So it's just learning and facts and fun stuff and interesting. So here we are.
So the topic we're talking about, a very exciting topic that people seem to not want to talk about, is death. We're going to talk about death. And part of the reason why we're going to talk about this is Julia inspired this because she put together a death cafe. There are actually conversations that happen all over the world, virtually and in person, where people talk about death and grief and everything around that. And Julie and I had an amazing conversation. We were like, oh, let's bring Lauren into this and let's actually explore a lot of, let's get into the nitty gritty of death, both the amazing things about it and also the really sad things about it and everything in between. So my first question to both of you is, when was your first experience with death? And Julia, go ahead, you can start.
Be the first. My first experience with death was pretty young. I remember going to wakes and funerals, but always kind of hiding in the back of the room and never really being sort of in it. And it was always an aunt of an aunt. But when I was 16, a teammate on my softball team was in a really horrific car accident and was in a coma for a couple days and then passed away. And that was really earth-shattering, in part because it was pulled back. She was 16. She also had a twin sister, and I have an identical twin. And so it ended up being so much more than just simply the loss of her. It was also this awakening of I can die. Oh my God, my twin can die. Just, it totally shattered my reality, ultimately in a positive way. But at the time, I just remember sobbing for 6 weeks, pretty solidly. So I typically point to that as my pivotal first experience with death.
Lauren?
Well, kind of like Julia touched upon, I feel like that there's different versions of your levels of experience with it. The subtle periphery versions, I feel like I didn't have a pet growing up, but we had fish, and I was when you have to flush a fish down a toilet like that, that's the very first inklings of death. We had to do that, and oh, you're just gonna go into wherever it's going. But then there was also the extended family funeral things where it's just I was young enough and I didn't know, I was it's auntie somebody, great uncle, whoever, and you're there and you're dressed nice, and then people are walking to pass and pay respects, but we were kids, so you just stay here. And we're okay, so we didn't fully get what was going on. And then similarly, I actually was about 17 and my mom passed away. That was probably the first close, real, the biggest one that I can remember early enough. And I had, lots of additional experiences with other death things, but those were the ones that I think were kind of starting then people, and then actually close to you, and like what that kind of looks like. So those are kind of my starting perspectives on death for this conversation.
Yeah, when I think of mine, I agree. Yeah, I had a very similar experience of like when you would remember when you burnt your first ant with your magnifying glass. Remember that? You remember that? And that was so sad. But at the time, you were like, "Oh, look at me!" I'm just like. So I think there was a lot of that surface level. Oh, a fish died, or oh, this died, but it wasn't anything. uh I didn't feel anything. And then when someone would tell me that someone died, I was like, oh yeah, yeah, that's sad, but again, not feeling anything. And I feel like I didn't really have a pivotal, powerful experience until like recently, which was like 5 years ago when my dad died. So I didn't really understand at all what it was until it like directly hit. And then I was like, oh my gosh, like this is horrible, and at the time, and part of the reason why I asked Lauren to join us is because I went straight to Lauren because I was like, I don't even know how to deal with this in addition to the fact that I have to now organize a funeral. Like that there were like these logistics that one had. So I was just like, what is all this that's going on? So a question that comes up for me is like, why do you think people avoid talking about it so much?
I mean, I think there's a lot of different layers to it. Like
Yeah.
there's like many umbrellas, and I think the broad like U.S. cultural umbrella is like we've gotten really far away. Death is very institutionalized now, and it happens in the hospital, and dead bodies, like no one would ever touch a dead body, like that kind of mentality. And that really had just progressed over the 1900s and then obviously into the 2000s. And then I see another level of, like on the familial level, particularly, let's say with my family, this in my experience, we don't talk that much about it. And I think that's because it's just really painful, and we were never really given the tools to say, here's how we process these really difficult emotions. And then kind of that funnels down into my own experience, where I was really afraid of death for a long time because it just felt like, well, number one, scary and unknown, but also this kind of antithesis of an achiever. Like, if I die, I can't do any more things. Like, I can't keep doing all of the things. And so not having that sense of like, it's good, I can keep doing the things, basically, I think was a big piece of just being like, I'm fine, I'll think about it later. Because everybody who dies is like 90, aren't they?
Right.
Yeah.
Like it's what happens later at the end of, it's the end of life, which is like you have your whole lifespan and you're like, fine, it's later, it's over there. I kind of agree too that there's just something like there's like not a tie to it maybe anymore, not anymore, but like less so for a lot of people, because like I don't have all of the history, but if I want to go low-key historical surface context, it's just like towns were smaller, like there was just more like closer people. It was like the doctor, you knew people, like that person died and then something had to happen. But now it's all like much more spread out, and your like network of who you actually talk to is like different, and you don't see it, and when we do see it, it's like in very epic, I feel like maybe that's not quite the right word, but it's like very like in movies or TV or like crime scene investigation, or it's like a very pivotal thing in a story, like a plot, something. So it almost feels out of touch, and kind of that we've grown that way too. And so I feel like it gets talked about in a very like third party kind of way. It's like I don't always, even me now, like it's been around me, but like I don't always think actively like that could happen at any minute. but like you do, but it's also a weird juxtaposition of the like people don't really talk about death, but there's also such a like seize the moment, but like without talking about like the death part,
Yeah.
which is really weird
Oh,
because
so
it's
weird.
directly connected. But like it's like the
YOLO.
fun part. It's the fun.
Right.
It's the fun part of it. Like we don't address
Right.
that because it's not as fun, and people want fun and instant
Right.
gratification. And there's just something about that as well. That's really weird.
That's so interesting you say that. It's that YOLO, right? That YOLO part, like, you know, and it's interesting because I almost feel by people embracing that seize the day moment part without also embracing the aspect of death, you can't really fully seize the day.
Yeah.
Oh, totally.
It's like a faux surface, like, I'm gonna do this. You're like,
Oh.
but do you actually understand what you're saying or doing with this?
Oh, totally. I'm in a like my new version of YOLO. I mean, I've never been a big risk taker, so it was never bungee jumping for me. But like,
Oh no.
my
no.
version of YOLO is like, I'm gonna wake up at 5:45 and I'm gonna get my full meditation in, and then I'm gonna take a walk, and then I'm gonna go to yoga, and then I'm gonna eat a delicious lunch. Like my YOLO now is just like have this most ease possible. Like I don't need
Love
the bucket list stuff. Like, and I think that's a big piece of because Lauren, in case you don't know my background, which I never mind if you Googled me, but I was diagnosed with thyroid cancer in 2018. I was 29 at the time. And thankfully it was very treatable, but it's still enough for me to be like, oh, hey, mortality. How's it going?
Right.
Yeah. And I think that was such a transformative experience on so many levels, but a big piece of it was just being like, okay, mortality, like, let's be friends. Let's hang out. Because, you know, it really then informs how I actually live my life. And thankfully, in theory, my life will be, you know, it's not a terminal illness for me, but I could get hit by a bus tomorrow. So I won't even say that I have a long life because TBD.
Well, one other thing that I think of is why do people, I partly feel as if people see death as contagious, and as if
Totally.
they talk about it, it might happen to them. Where does that come from? Like, what is that?
I mean, to me, it kind of comes back to that same idea where in the early 1900s, let's say, you would probably die at home surrounded by your family. They would probably take care of your body. Like everything was very normal in the process of death. And I think I have no idea. This is just my theory that it's sort of a sign of wealth then that someone else would take care of the dead. Like it kind of over time, if you had the resources, someone else could deal with the kind of messy, gross, upsetting. And then, you know, that started the shift into like, well, you know, you have to go to a hospital. Right. So now if someone drops dead, everyone's like, oh, you know, like, again, you can't touch them, but from a very literal, like contagious standpoint. But I think it's a similar mindset that people think like, well, it's always someone else. It's always the other people, and it's not me or not my family, or just because it's so hard to think of for a lot of people, difficult emotions.
I mean, going off of the emotions thing too, I feel like there's even something of like, I'm not quite sure if this is how you framed it, Jeff, in like the contagious, like they don't want to like talk or be around or whatever, those things. But it is like when I've had like my mom or dad pass away, when that happened, it's like a thing that happens, but then there's so many things that have to happen. Like you said, you're like, okay, well, this happened. And then there's the emotion and like processing, but then also like life goes on and you like your job, and then you have to plan this extra stuff like for funeral or services. And not to say that it's a burden necessarily, but it's just, it forces you to face a lot that I think that people are really uncomfortable with. And whether that's like death or mortality or any of those things, like that could be with anything potentially, like just a hard, like difficult feeling decisions. But especially because it has this heavy, there's like a heavier weight of like the mortality realization part to it, that I don't like, not necessarily contagious. It's just like ooh, like, am I choosing to put myself in that field of whatever? Because it is like at that point, like, it is a choice of whether if it's yourself or someone, like, am I going to like dive in a sense of like discussing, figuring things out, processing emotions, or like shut it down and like, I'm not, like, I can't deal with this right now because I want to deal with this because I don't want to deal with this stuff.
Right.
Yeah, just like that, the processing part of it.
Yeah, like it was interesting. I remember when my dad died, like I remember getting on a plane at 2 a.m. from the Bay, from California, to come to Chicago. And by like noon, we were looking at funeral plots,
Ugh.
and we were looking at like coffins. And this guy is upselling us on a coffin. Like, this is a better coffin than this is a better coffin. And I'm like, what is happening? Like, my dad just died, and this guy's selling me a car as a coffin. Like, it just blew. I was just like, what is going on? And then the logistics of like contacting people. And this is what I called Lauren about, because there were a lot of people that were calling, or I would call them or email them and be like, hey, this is when the funeral is, blah, 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 all these stuff. Doing all the logistics, because that was the way I was going to cope. Is I was like, I'm going to just focus on doing stuff. Like, that's going to be my way. I'm just going to keep doing stuff because that's going to be helpful. And when my sisters didn't do as much stuff, I would get really pissed off at them, only to realize later, like, oh yeah, they're coping with death. Like, that's how they're coping, right? But people would contact me and then want to, at that point, grieve at that very moment, which just was mind-boggling to me, because I was like, do you know I got 30 more phone calls to make? So I had to call Lauren to be like, yo, what am I supposed to say to these people? Because they want to grieve right now. Like, they're ready right now.
That's like almost like in the sense of, I feel like my brain is stuck on the contagious thing, but it's just like diving in or not diving in, right? And a lot of people choose to not dive in discussion when it happens, right. Like whatever that is. And when it does happen close to you, in the sense that like you're like directly like a family member or friends, and like close friends, where you're like, I need to do something or be involved in some way. And you can choose to or not to dive in and do whatever is like emotionally or that, and deal with what's going on. But then it is the other periphery people of, it's like that, it feels individual but together, but when other people are trying to like worm their way and you're like, get away. like you're trying to dive in, but I don't want you to dive in here, because it's a weirdly like personal,
yeah,
but it's like personal for me, but it was personal for the person who maybe has died, but they are a different person, and it's like colliding of a lot of worlds, like spiritually, if you want to go there, or just like friend, network, family, all the things. It's a lot of, it's like a forced collision of so many things that I almost feel like that's what it's messy. And it's like when you don't want things to be messy and you want it to be clear and easy so you can deal with whatever, but it's like forced messiness.
Totally. I mean, I think Jeff was talking about like, there's a term in psychology, it's like overfunctioners and underfunctioners, and it's like a stress response. So some people do, and some people just like can't do anything. And having to reconcile those two modes while trying to get things done, and then be like, this person doesn't exist anymore. Like, it just like, no wonder it's so complicated. And everyone is like so understandably consumed by their own version of grief. It's really, really hard to like hold space for other people's grief amidst that. And so everyone's kind of like fighting to, they're like, the grieving needs to be on my terms. But then the people are like, but on my terms is me talking to you, and on your terms is like not talking to anybody.
Right.
Yeah.
All the things.
It's so interesting. It reminded me of this Vice piece I saw a while back where it was a person on Twitch that played a ton of video games, super popular, and he passed away. And he had a whole community of Twitch friends that basically he had done huge fundraisers with and had huge relationships with, but they had never met him face to face. It was always virtual. And then he had his family who didn't even know about his Twitch life. So watching these two groups,
like literal worlds colliding.
Yeah, in a total, and being frustrated at each other because they were like, you don't know him, I know him. I know him this way. And they're like, you don't know them. You're just some random YouTuber. Like, I don't know who you are. And they're like, we know him more than you know him. It was just so fascinating, people trying, and you could tell they were all just trying to grieve and really remember him. But they all felt like they needed to own that, and that if someone else was owning another part, they were redefining how that happened, which is just so weird.
You saying that makes me think it's okay. I will disclaimer this saying like I'm not spiritual, but I'm not religious. And that's a whole another level of all of this too, that I don't have as much practice with or anything like that. But it's such a weird thing because, okay, usually somebody's actions are like, I choose an action that affects me and might affect some other people, but it's like, I'm choosing. This is death is something that, an action that happens to somebody, but then it's one of those times where in the world we're like, oh, we're gonna do this for the person who is no longer here. We want to have the service and like celebrate life or mourn or whatever. But in actuality, it's all for not that person. Totally. It's all like it's a weird time where it's like supposed to be about that person, but it's actually like everybody about themselves in like a very confusingly weird way, because they all want to be there for that person, but all of them are individually correctly doing it for themselves. Totally. Which feels, it's like, and it's not in like a selfish way necessarily, but it's the reality of what it is. Like how like if we all knew a fourth person who like maybe passed, and then we all come together, like how I deal versus how you deal versus how you deal is all gonna be different, and we're all trying to do right by the person. However, it has kind of nothing to do with them because it's about us.
Yeah. Well, I recently had a friend who lost a friend, and they were like, I'm sort of worried because like I feel like I'm just only thinking about myself right now. And I was like, yeah, I kind of think that's how that goes though. Like mortality is so much about, of course it's the loss of that person, but the reflection back to you of your own life and your own existence. And that is definitely something that no one ever talks about. In my own like end of life instructions for my family, because I have a PDF that's like tells them what to do and all the people to call. And then I tell them like, here's what I think would be nice for a party instead of a funeral, except you guys can kind of pick the menu because I won't be there to eat any of the food. So I could not give less of a shit about it, basically. Like, do your thing. Do what makes you happy. Have, all the things. So yeah, totally. It's all about the remaining.
I also, and let me know if any of you feel this way, but I got somewhat frustrated at my dad's funeral because I was like, he would have loved to hear all this when he was alive, Julie and I had talked about, the Tuesdays with Maury, how Maury had a living funeral. Like he laid on his couch and a bunch of people came by and they said what they loved about that person. I think there's something magical and powerful about that. And I recently shared this, that so my mom and I celebrate our birthday together. It's August 4th. So this past birthday, I found out the day before that my former elementary school music teacher was in hospice, and they didn't know how long she was going to be able to live. And that people were going to visit her, and they had been for like the last month, where they could sing to her. And I was like, oh my gosh, like that's what we're gonna do. That's what we're gonna do on our birthday. So we woke up early. I dragged my nephew out early from bed, even though it was summer. And we got there by like 8:39. And it was like my nephews, my sister, who also was taught by this music teacher, and me and my mom. And at first it was super weird because we were like, where do we go? I don't know where to go. And then they were like, oh, you go over here. And then you kind of walk over. And then all of a sudden they open up the window and she's right there. And we have our masks on. And they're like, and then they just walked out. And then we were like, what are we supposed to do? I don't know what we're supposed to do, And then, so we just start singing, and we sing horribly. Like it's like she would not be happy with it. But there was something just like amazing about this person and being able to celebrate her while she was alive, and also thinking that this was the same person that like helped me get on stage for the first time, the first person that got me to sing in front of people, like all these risks. And now it almost come full circle, not just for me, but for so many people, that they were like, I must say goodbye to you, right in front of you, instead of just hearing about it later. Right.
Yeah.
And then 3 days later, she passed away. And I felt like that experience of being able to say goodbye to her was like life changing. Because it could have been the opposite of me being like, oh, did she die? Oh, that's so sad. Moving on with my life. But instead I was like looking at her and being like, oh my gosh, like you had such an impact on so many people's lives. And because of that, now I feel a need to also do that, or take on a bigger mantle of that. I don't know. I had to share that.
Well, that's really sweet. And it's like death is an ultimatum, right? It's like, did that person get to do what they wanted to do before they're not here? Did you say the things that you wanted to say before they're not here? And then once you're faced with that, it's like, I feel like the thing that a lot of people, I feel like that if first, maybe not first, but like there's just like the potentially realization that their verb tense existence is different. Maybe you experience that later. I've had that happen in two different ways for myself. But one of the very soon things, other than just like that pure realization of like things have changed, is just the like there's so much like that like heart-wrenching potential regret where you're like, what was the last thing I said to them? What was the last like time we like when was the last time we spoke? Like, did I spend enough time? Like, did I say the things that I wanted? Like, I can't believe they never got to do their dream vacation. Like, it's all of like those regrets all like rung up inside of like you for yourself and for them. That I feel like there is, depending on who or when you experience, come to terms with somebody experiencing death around you, being able to, if you can or can't have closure, which is kind of like what I would say, like Jeff, you had said like full circle, you're like, oh man, like I don't want to wonder, like, oh, let's just go. And it's kind of for you and kind of for them, because like you don't like, especially now in 2020, there's a lot of people who don't get closure regardless of how close you are to somebody, because of just like pandemic things, and no one can have visitors, and like that's like crazy and stressful, and there's just no possibility for like that closure sort of moment, time, anything, like let me do what I can while I can, which is like a heavy thing.
Totally. Yeah, I mean, I think there's, for me, closure, I mean, I think everybody thinks closure is kind of a very amorphous thing because it looks so different in every scenario. But I think what I think about a lot now is this idea of like an energetic exchange with someone for me is like closure. And a big reason why I'm so obsessed with intentional living is just being like, okay, so every action every day and the things that I say to everybody that I interact with could be the last thing that I said to them. It doesn't need to be like the big speech of my life. It could just simply be like, thanks for making dinner. But like just having that sense of like living in the present moment as a way to avoid regret.
Yeah, the regret thing.
And just to not leave everything till later. Because I think that's how the regret piles up.
Totally.
Yeah, like I don't know if this is a healthy way of looking at it, but I always, if I'm making a video or doing something, I'll create something and be like, well, if I die tomorrow, at least that's out. Like I think that, like even with this, I'm like, well, if we document this, at least we share this, that, you know, at least I got this out. So like there's this, and I don't know if it's thinking about death or being close to death makes me feel closer to being alive. Do you all feel or relate to that in any way?
I think that I want to say yes, but it's kind of like if you're like, okay, age wise, like I'm like mid 30s and like the like average lifespan like is wherever it is. And if you think about that, like, okay, you're like on this spectrum scale of life, let's pretend you're here, okay, like you're getting closer. And I feel like even I don't think that I think about it often necessarily, so I don't have like active conscious thoughts about that. But I feel like for me, and maybe for a lot of everybody now in this world that we live in, I think that there's a lot of feeling of like you're getting closer, and not so much like if you're close to death, you're like more feeling more alive. It's more of the like, there's not enough time. Like, what about all this? Like, it's like kind of like not exactly regret, but kind of like, but I never got to do this, or I didn't make the time. And it's not exactly regret, but it's like kind of close, where it's just like you may or may not do anything about it, but then you're like panicking about like the lack of whatever is left instead of enjoying the present sometimes. Because it feels, it's like that thing over there that you can see coming, but you're not immediately faced with it, so it's like almost daunting in a weird way. That feels like something that I've heard, like not heard actually, but like I can hear in a lot of conversations and stuff like that, you know.
Well, it's kind of like when you say that, it reminds me of even something as simple as, well, not maybe during COVID, but like the end of a vacation when you're like 2 days in and you're like, oh, I never wanted to end, you know, like, but the flight home, you know, and you get the email to check in and kind of, get stuck in the future of like, but there's this time where I'm not going to be able to do anything that I have, you know, there's so many books I want to read. There's like not even slightly enough time for me to read them in my lifetime, but I'm like, okay, so I can stop worrying about that and just start plowing through my reading list.
Like just start it, just do something you like, because just do it now.
Yes.
I guess a reason why I think of like as you get closer to death, you could, and I don't think it always happens, but you could feel more alive, is I really think of Chadwick Boseman, right? Is because he has cancer for the last 4 or 5 years. That's when he did some of his like greatest work, you know, and he, you know, so he did 3 Marvel movies. He did The Bloods. He was going to cancer wards and not talking about his cancer, but giving attention to all these people, all these kids that did. And and if you even watch how he acts, or at least this is how I see it when I'm watching him act, I was like, there was such a level of like, perseverance and confidence and like all in that I was like, this sounded weird, but I was like, it was almost like he was in my opinion, transcending acting and being like, just like, he was not of this time. I felt like it was of some other time, because he was showing up in a way that was very like unique and powerful. But at the time, I wouldn't even have thought of it. I was just like, he's just a really good actor, you know. But now I'm like, oh, that was why. Is because every single performance that he was doing, he was like, this could be it. This is it. And I even think of those cancer patients that would tell him, I know I'm going to die, but I'm just waiting for you to finish this movie so I can see it before I die. And it was like, oh my gosh, just like to hear that. And then the purpose behind that of like him doing his work, knowing that his death, but as well as it was related to all these other people's. That's what I think of when I'm like, that's true living. Like that's
Yeah.
all in. That's the true YOLO, or the true seize the day, right?
That's hard though.
That's hard.
That's hard to, I think, commit to personally, especially because like we don't have to super veer into this, but like it is like, what are you capable of? Because if you're also like living paycheck to paycheck, like how do I live my best life?
Mm-hmm.
Like this is really hard. And like that's again also, I think sometimes if you are in that place, then you can't, like you do want to distance yourself from it, because you're like, I don't want to think that that's what's around the corner, because like this is where I'm at, and like what am I, like why am I even, what's happening? And it's easier to be hopeful than I don't even want to say like death is like the opposite of hope, but it like puts you in like a pivotal choice place that is scarier than just like, oh, it'll be fine, light at the end of the tunnel, like it's okay. It's at a bigger crossroads of like making choices of like, okay, am I going to like live more or fear this, or like can I make this choice, versus being like, it's gonna get better tomorrow and I'm just gonna live my life and tomorrow's gonna be better, but like not thinking about it that hard.
So then a question that comes up for me is, how do you help somebody to live a more intentional life if they have not experienced death or a finality in their life before? And they're like, I'm just going to get to it later.
Yeah. I mean, that's why I exist right now. That's my purpose. Yeah. But really it's so much about just a lot of avoiding death and dying is just being really busy and keeping yourself busy and not stopping. So slowing down enough to have conversations with friends, asking people, just like, I'll ask people, like, if you knew you were going to die in 6 months, what on your to-do list today matters to you? And trying to reframe this idea that that we have time later to do things, because we really are set up like that, where we're always trying to like get next goals, and that's how school goes, and you're like, I just need to get to that phase of my life, and then I'll get the like white picket fence, and then I'll retire, and there's always later. And I just started taking a course online about, it's research about success, and one of the things the professor said today that really struck me was like, she was talking about death and dying and as that relates to kind of success, and she was like, well, if you die before your time, and I was like, what a weird phrase, because like that's like still
your
really
time is just your time.
Yeah, and it's definitely implying that, I feel like that's code for if you die before you're like 70 and above, and
like before you're finished.
Exactly. Like you've somehow completed everything that you came here to do. Like, yeah. And that just really was like, oh, yeah. So ask your friends those questions when you're having coffee and see what comes up. Yeah.
Because you bring up a good point, because I've met people that, in their 70s and 80s that have a huge amount of regrets, right? And then I know people in there that are much younger that don't, right? And vice versa. It's not about age. It's more about like, how do you want to show up during the time that you have? And I think of that article about death where they interviewed, I think it was Harvard did all this research and found like some of the biggest regrets people had was working too much, not spending enough time with family and friends, you know. And then also, and this is the one that like gets me the most, is like living someone else's life, you know, like doing what I thought others wanted me to do instead of doing what I wanted to do. And it was like, oh my gosh.
Yeah. Like the thing that you, Julie, you had just said from the lecture, if you die before your time, like that's like that's a very interesting thing, like sentence to think about for all the purposes that we're talking about now, but also just like what does that mean?
I literally wrote it on a post-it.
But it reminds, it's important. You're like, no,
Yeah.
I'm gonna like stare at this and try to remember and understand what is happening. In a very similar way, I think like the Jeff, you were saying that not everybody, many people, when there are regrets, it's like, oh, I didn't do this thing, or I like wasted all my time working at this job that I hated or whatever to make enough money to do what you want eventually. But like, are you gonna get there? Like do the things you like now. And it kind of reminds me a little bit, like this is a little tangential, but it's a similar for someone who hasn't, because it's different when you're like, even if it's like, I have a best friend whose family member passed away, something like that might be very close, but it's like not the same as someone who's like directly your connection. And so for anyone who maybe doesn't have that connection, there's the way that you can kind of think about it, or a way to sort of shift the time, why wait perspective thing, is like you feel like you can't make time now because there's the stuff that you have to do, right? Do the stuff you have to do so you can do the stuff you want to do, but you don't feel like you have time to do the stuff you want to do. But you can, because I was at like a workshop or something once where someone was talking about like, you can make time, and people are like, no, you can't. Like time is time. But if you're as busy as you are and suddenly your house floods, you have to deal with that, and you still also get the stuff done that you need to get done, like either postpone work meetings, or like maybe you do takeout instead of making dinner, or maybe one of your kids doesn't go to whatever practice today, but like you can make time. You don't feel like you can, but you can. And there, like if you can shift that perspective a little bit, that's maybe something that could help people live more, or like recognize that even if they don't have that experience to draw from personal experience with anything. It's very much just like, yeah, you can do stuff. Like there is time. Don't wait till later.
And the other part that comes up for me when you say that is I think of, yes, of all the times, this would be the time. Like COVID is telling the world and telling every human being to slow down, you know, and like really reflect on like what is actually important, right? I don't think a lot of us have even internalized the fact of 180,000 people dying just in America, right? Like that's ridiculous. And the ripple effect that might be having, the grief that might be having, that we, you know, as a whole community are probably feeling, but trying to like kind of ignore. And I think of something, I've talked about this a few times, of like, I've met so many people that suffer from affluent deadness, where they got all the stuff, they did all the things, they have the white picket fence, the $1 million home, they're millionaires, they might be multimillionaires, they could travel the world over 3 or 4 times, and when you look at them, they look bored out of their mind. They look bored, or they look scared about losing their stuff, or they care about things that I know they won't care about at the end of their life. But at this moment, they're more focused on that. And it's so ironic that you have this group of people that have so much stuff and don't understand that they could live whatever life they want to live. And then you have another group of people that are striving to get there, only to then find that that is not the happiness thing. And that just blows my mind, man.
It's very weird. Like, I don't even know if it's a vicious circle, but it's just like a vicious misunderstanding of what is living. Because when you're like for me, in my experience with the people who are no longer around, like what I choose, what I remember of their life is generally, most of the time, good things. Like, yeah, like not everything was like roses and puppies and whatever. But like, I'm not trying to actively remember the terrible things, which is a really interesting actually thing. It's just like, it's like a magic, like once they're not here, it's like here's all the positive versions, which not always, but a lot of times it's like you want to remember all the good stuff.
Right.
And that's where memories come up and you're like, oh, remember that time, or like that thing they always said or always did, or you miss because like now nobody slams whatever drawer closed. Like then they always would slam the drawer. Like you didn't need to. It was a very calm evening. You just slammed all the drawers with the spoons. Like, I don't know. Like, it's just like weird little things. But it's those little things that you remember. It's like the good stuff, and it's none of it's like, oh, they had $1 billion. Like nobody cares later. Like,
Oh yeah.
like
No.
that's not important.
Yeah. They don't reveal the bank account number at the funeral. Look at all the stuff that person had.
Yeah.
Congratulations.
Mhm. I mean, as a professional home organizer, all I did was sort the piles and piles of stuff of the millionaires and billionaires in Los Angeles, and like you get a very intimate look at people's lives at that point, and everybody is embarrassed about the same things, and I'm like, you have the literal same items in your house that you're embarrassed about that all of my clients have. Like, you guys are all the same, and I wish you would talk about it, because all of a sudden you'd be like, oh, I'm not happy and you're not happy. I thought you guys were happy, so I was trying to do what you're doing. And if we could just talk about it a little more, I feel like everyone would be like, oh, well, I did really enjoy the $40,000 trip I took to Fiji with my whole family, but it's because I went with my whole family, not because I went on this bougie trip. Like, really getting into the why. There's a video that's like, it might have been a commercial or something, and I think that they referenced it in this course that I'm taking, and they ask the adults, there's like families, and they ask the adults separately, like, if you could have dinner with anyone in the world, who would you? People name celebrities, and then they ask the kids, and most of the kids are like, my family, my extended family. And then the one kid was like, does it have to be a celebrity? Can it just be my parents? And it was like, oh yeah, like,
oh wait, that's what matters.
It's so simple. Yeah.
So
yeah.
So one of my final questions that I have for y'all is, when someone does die and someone that hasn't experienced death but wants to console that person, wants to show up, but they don't know what to do. What can they do to feel like they can be of support, and that it's just not cliche? They're just not saying cliche lines like, I'm so sorry for your loss, my thoughts and prayers, but actually really support and be there for the person. What advice would you give?
I mean, it's hard to, every person is different, and if you don't practice a lot of empathy, it's hard to play off of other people. So like, empathy would be very useful, but that aside, I think in my experience, there's a lot of warmth in saying like, I'm here for you, so that, reminding people that you're a support system and that you're there and you don't need something from them, but like, you want to be there, like a way to tell them without encroaching on, people calling someone and them pouring their guts out. And you're like, I just needed to find out if we can park in that parking space. Like, and then, I mean, it's a very similar situation. They always consider cancer as very like a casserole type illness, where people, they don't know what to do, but they'll bring a casserole over to you. And it's just like people trying to reach out. And so I think it depends on how well you know the other person.
Mhm.
And do they hate doing laundry? Because maybe suggest that you come over and do their cleaning and laundry. Or like, do they love this one? Do they love food? Is that their kind of like comfort vice? Can you get them that food in some way? Can you ship it to them? Dry ice Lou Malnati's some pizza across the country, you know, like that sort of gesture. And I think just like, I mean, the idea of holding space is not super commonly practiced. Like, that's not like the societal norm of friendship, but like calling someone on FaceTime and then just sitting there
Mm-hmm.
and like just being there. Because you're like, well, there's nothing we can do. If they want to talk, you can talk, but I'm not going to be the one to talk first. And then, you know, just that kind of coming back to the I'm here for you.
Mm.
Yeah. That's all I can think of. There's so many different things, but I think it's a good spot to leave it.
I have very similar things where like if you want to say or do something, then similarly like don't regret and do it. Don't like I would encourage people to maybe not push like where they're just like they want to mourn with someone on the phone, like that's maybe not the time when things are fresh and recent. But like if you want to say like call and say like I'm so sorry, I don't know what to say, but I'm here for you, like that's fine, and that could be the end of the conversation. Related to the things that Julia was saying, I think that kind of like what is it, it's the mental load thing that gets talked about with like house chores and stuff. It's just like if you're thinking about it a lot and like, oh, you should have just asked. I would encourage people to maybe not ask like how can I help you, because if someone's going through stuff, like I don't know what to tell you, like you can't
Totally.
fix anything.
Yep.
So it's more of like making a choice of like, I'd really like to go grocery shopping for you, is that okay, can you make me a list, I'll go pick it all up or whatever. Like I'd really like to help you do some chores, like can I mow your lawn, like come up with an option for them rather than how can I help you, because like there's too many things happening. So have an option. And then one other thing that I think is I wanted to bring up, or it dawned on me a minute ago, that's not exactly when people want to share immediate sympathy, condolence type things, but it's also later. I think that this was in the like Netflix Brene Brown Call to Courage special thing that's been on Netflix for a while. But I think it was on there, and she said something that like really like hit me because of my experiences with like death and things like that. But she was talking about speaking to groups who've gone through some trauma of some kind. And I don't remember if she said it or someone said it to her, but there was a quote that I like paused and like wrote down, just like your post-it note. I was like, I need to write this down like word for word because it's so good. And I might not say it word for word exactly right now, but it's something along the lines of like, if I have had, both of my parents have passed away, and I think that there is something, depending on how recent that has happened, like not immediately, but like a year, 2 years after that has happened, people want to like tiptoe around that because they like, oh, I don't want to make you feel bad. But there was a quote in this talk that was something along the lines of like, when you show how grateful for you are for what you have, I know that you understand what I've lost. Like I don't, because if you don't talk about it, I can't talk about it. And if you tiptoe around talking about your parents, like that's one part of your life I don't get to know. I don't get to also then like be like, oh yeah, like my dad used to do that. Like I don't get a chance to talk about it. So like you kind of gotta read the room a little bit, because like maybe not right away, or like I've also when I've asked, because sometimes people grieve differently too, is I have also asked people like, I know that this sucks right now, like I've been through this, if you want to talk about anything, I'm totally here. Like also, even you want to just like, I didn't know your family member or whoever it was that well, like I'd love to hear some like really great stories if you ever want to share them. Trying to give them the opportunity, because like they have all these feelings and memories and stuff that they don't have nowhere to go. So those are my suggestions for whoever.
Yeah. If I think of what I would suggest to someone is I would challenge them to go past the platitudes, because the platitude is for you to be like, let me say this one thing to them, so sorry for your loss, or whatever you have to say, and then move on. And there's something about like sitting, even if it's just for a few minutes, and being like, someone just passed away. It's like someone just left this earth. That is a really big deal. And that person is connected to someone that I love or someone that I cared for, right? And I realized that I recently started doing this is where I would write an email or a letter to someone and I would be like, I don't know what to say. And and I wasn't trying to fix it, because I think a lot of people are always trying to fix it. Like, how can I
Make
make you
people
feel better?
Yeah.
Mhm.
What you're saying when you're saying, how can I make you feel better, is you're saying like, can you just forget about that death right now? Because I want you to feel better, because then I'll feel better. And it's just like, it's denying reality. It's denying the truth. And it's denying also that person's opportunity to mourn, grieve, as well as celebrate that person's memory, right? But I've been writing to people like, you know what? I didn't know, like, for example, I didn't know your mom. But just knowing you and knowing how much of a good soul you are, and just reflecting all of the amazing things that I appreciate about that person, I was like, she must have been amazing to have raised someone like you. And I don't know where that's coming from. I don't know if I'm saying it or if it's like channeling through me or whatever it is, but there's something about like just acknowledging like what is happening at that time and getting quiet enough to know that like your inner soul or your inner child does have something more powerful to say if you're willing to show up. And then the other part that I would say to people is I would also ask them to check in on that person, not just like a month out or 2 months out, but like grieving comes and goes, man. There's like huge roller coasters of, you're just chilling and all of a sudden it hits you 6 months or a year later or a decade later. It could be just a smell or something. And still asking the person about, like, well, not even asking, but just showing up and being there for them without this goal of trying to achieve a certain result or fix them, and just being there, but constantly showing up is, I think, something that is like valuable for people. Um, yeah.
I do want to one more. I just want to also say that I think Julia's thing, kind of like both of you have said, like the quiet moment or just existing, is a really important thing. It's hard to do right now, where it's like FaceTime, or like we can just sit on a video chat and just like be, or like we're gonna like watch something on TV at the same time, but like not actually talk to each other. It's a lot harder to do now, but that also is just like a form of, not that it has to be normal, but like just another person being around, or like sound happening where that might not be happening for them. They might not actively be like going through the motions of regular life. So offering to like be there, like if you can be with somebody, like I remember a time where I did that, where I was just like, I mean, I work from home, so I have work to do, but if you want me to come like work next to you, like we don't have to talk. But that's much harder. But like if you can just be like, would you want to like watch this stupid movie we've watched 100 times, so it doesn't really matter, but like we can like be on this together. It's hard. It's extra hard right now.
Right.
But finding ways to do that, I think, is really good.
And be human. So
Yeah.
any final thoughts that you'd want to leave people that see this, and how it ties into like even like the magical part of death as well? Is there anything that you'd want to wrap up or share as your final message?
I mean, there's so much to say, but I think what has come up a lot for me in this conversation is I think people really edit themselves and how they grieve and how they talk about death and when they do all these things, and just really encouraging people to notice when they feel like they're holding back for some reason, because usually if you're asking a question or you're offering to bring something or do something for someone and it's coming from a place of just like love and care, it doesn't usually take you to a realm that you can't handle. And your emotions, frankly, cannot kill you. For as big and as scary as they are, you have likely felt all of them before, and you're still here and you're still going. So try to notice when you're catching yourself, because you're trying not to dive into that place.
I guess on a similar note too, like it's just like when you're faced with death or like like the mortality and living versus where you're at, I feel like just a knowing that whether you're having grieving feelings because you've been hit with an experience, or if like your form of like living YOLO, whatever, like everyone's kind of different and there isn't a right way to do anything. So feel how you want to feel. Let people help you, like let people help you or say things if you're like open to it. If you need to like literally do nothing in the dark for a day, like okay, like maybe that's what you need. Like if you need to like run around for several miles and that's your thing, do what makes you feel okay, because it is okay. Like that's you're your own person and everybody handles things differently and there's not right or wrong way. So do it.
And what I resonate with is what you said earlier, Julia. What was the question that you asked people?
Oh, if you had 6 months to live, what on your to-do list today matters to you?
So I would challenge people to think about that part of like what is actually on that list that matters, and also what is not on that list that is more important. Because I think so much of the time we believe our value is based off of our productivity, when like really our value is being human. And I think a lot of times we're told not to be. So just be human. So thanks so much. Oh, this was amazing. Thanks so much, Lauren and Julia. Oh, this was awesome. If people want to find out more about you, where can they find you?
Lauren?
I was like, I'm on LinkedIn and we're working on some things. That's what I've got.
Amazing. I'm on LinkedIn also, but variably. I would say Instagram is probably a good spot to find me. I'm at life.coach.julia. I post a lot of photos of sunsets and, all the intentional living things. So
Thanks so much. Take care, everyone. See you later.
thank you.